So the next thing I'm going to do is move to the gain controls of the trigger section. Now you can use the two gain controls above the trigger meters to adjust the level for the dual threshold recognition. Now the left-hand gain control determines the level for the transients of the original signal. If the signal does not have a wide dynamic range, you can improve the resolution of the parameter by increasing the gain value for transients. So as a useful rule of thumb, it is recommended to take the highest transient as a reference in order to take full advantage of the meters, and then set the green arrows just underneath the faintest transient. But let me first adjust the transient gain. And then I'm going to adjust the green arrow below, which corresponds to the threshold. In other words, it determines when a sample is to be played back. So I'm going to bring that up and put it just underneath the faintest snare drum signal. Try to not include any cross bleeds. There you go. The gain control determines the level for signal recognition by the triggers. So if the signal is too low, you can increase the level, and if the signal is too high, you should reduce it. If you want to be sure that the sample played back is always the loudest, you can increase the gain value until the peak signal reaches the upper region of the trigger meters and the red mark lights up. I always try to keep a balance between the gain control and the position of the green arrows on the level trigger meters to guarantee a better sound recognition. And there's a very easy way for you to find out if your settings are correct. Because if in the play button the LED is lighting up and the two green arrows are lighting up at the same time, that means that a sample is being triggered. And I've just seen that it isn't always lighting up, so let me bring down the two arrows a little more to increase the sensitivity, and that should work now. Now the red arrow determines the threshold for a rimshot to be triggered. So I'm going to bring that arrow down to increase the sensitivity, and then I'm going to take the trigger section out of the solo mode to listen to the sample. Now, in order to make sure that I listen correctly to everything that happens to the sample, I'm going to solo the sample section. And there I hear some misfires, so I'm going to bring the trigger threshold up to comb those out. That's much better. The rim control here sets the rimshot volume in relation to the drum sample. So here is an example with a lot of rim. But in this example, I don't want too much of that ringing sound, so I'm going to bring it down. Then, of course, you can use the transient designer for the sample section to shape the sound of only the sample. You can add or take away attack, or add and take away sustain. In this case, I'm going to take some of the sustain away because I want a really dry, funky snare drum that goes really well with the original one. And now comes a very important feature. The dynamics control determines how the DrumXchanger reacts to level variations in the original signal and plays back loud or soft samples accordingly. So the more you turn the knob to the left, the faster the volume of the played-back samples increases. On the contrary, if you turn the knob to the right, the volume of the samples increases more slowly. So I'm going to keep that on the right for now. Now here is an example for a possible application. If you want to even out a fluctuating drum sound with a lot of variations and a lot of dynamics, you can turn the knob to the left, and the further you turn, the higher the chances are that samples with the same volume are played back. That way, it is very easy to even out drums with a big volume curve when you want drums that are very even and very regular. If you want to catch the full dynamics of the original signal, and you wish to replace ghost notes but the sounds are too loud, you can turn the dynamics knob to the right to increase the dynamic range. By doing so, the loudest samples will be played only with the loudest drum hits. So you can totally match the behavior of the sample to the original behavior of the snare drum you recorded. Of course, then there is the tune control, and that allows you to tune the drums in your sample library. Now the tune control changes the pitch of the samples in 1 octave steps. The scale is divided in 12 semitone steps, and you can tune it down, all the way, or all the way up. And in our case, I'm going to be slightly above the middle. And now, of course, I'm going to unsolo the sample section and listen to the full thing. Now I'm going to go to a very important knob, the dry-wet control. The dry-wet control determines the ratio between the sample and the original signal. The ratio ranges from 0% on the left to 100% on the right, where 0% means only the original signal is played back, and 100% means only the sample is played back. When monitoring, the sample module solo function has the same effect as turning the dry-wet control to 100%. Now I want this snare drum track to sound alive, so I want to leave a bit of that crossbleed in the track so that in case the DrumXchanger misses 1 or 2 ghost notes that I didn't manage to get in with the threshold, it still captures that and it still displays it. So a good figure for that would be to set the dry-wet to about 80 or 75%. There we go, now the snare drum has a little crossbleed and a lot of the sample, and that gives it a very authentic and alive feeling. Now last but certainly not least, and very importantly, let's go to the output gain control. Why is that important? Well, generally speaking, you will need to reduce the level considering that the DrumXchanger tends to increase the level. Suppose you mix a sample with an already hot snare drum, or that it might be necessary for you to emphasize the attack in the original and in the sample. You can almost take for granted that the output signal will overload. Now, if this were the case, as is in this example, as you can see, you have to reduce the output level. I'm going to set this so it doesn't overload, but it still gives me as much level as possible. I'm just making sure that I have as much of the dynamic range as possible, but I'm trying to avoid distortion. And now I'm going to unsolo the snare drum channel. And there we go. That's a replaced snare drum. Let me bypass the DrumXchanger. Sounds a lot cleaner and pretty funky. So if you want to check out the DrumXchanger plugin for yourself, you can go online to www.spl.info. You can download the DrumXchanger plugin and all the sample libraries. You can install them on your computer and test them for 14 days without any limitations or restrictions. So thanks for watching. Have a lot of fun making music and experimenting around. And until next time, bye-bye.